Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the service at NetworkPharma TV, where you'll find hundreds of videos on all sorts of matters to do with the pharmaceutical industry, with a strong emphasis on medical communications, education, and publishing, it has to be said. Just for clarification at this stage, I've spent the last 18 years working with the MedComms community, running MedComms networking type activity, and I'm just sort of stepping back from that. I'm delighted that I've been able to stick around long enough to help with a survey, the so-called MedComms Freelancing Barometer that's just run in January. Eleanor, thank you very much for taking over from me. We ran it last year. It was very successful. We've run it again this year. I think it's absolutely fascinating to see the results. And the idea today is to look at those results, compare them with last year, and have an open Q&A about the state of the marketplace at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Eleanor to, in fact, I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourself briefly. So I'm going to start with Lisa, if I may. Lisa, give us a headline. Who are you? Where are you? And what do you do?
Hi, I'm a freelancer for several years and in MedComms for about 20. And I live in Montana in the Rocky Mountains in the US. And a couple of years ago, I created a group called Freelancers in Pubs, which is a very informal email list, free. Everything is free. Everyone's welcome to join. It's at freelancersinpubs.org. We do a monthly Zoom, very informal, and share. And the important thing is that through me and through Freelancers in Pubs, freelancers who work in publications can get pretty substantial discounts to ISMAP meetings worldwide. So annual meeting, European meeting, there were a dozen freelancers who Eleanor took out to dinner at the European meeting in London just this past month in January. So yeah, the most important thing is if you work in publications, I encourage you to look into Freelancers in Pubs and consider opportunities that ISMAP offers to freelancers.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lisa, for just sort of filling us in there. Adriana, tell us who you are, where you are, and what you do.
Hi there, my name is Adriana. I'm based in Portugal, and since last year, I'm the chair of the Freelance Business Group in the European Medical Writers Association, or EMWA. One of the main things we do within EMWA is organizing the Freelance Business Forum in the conferences in the spring and in the autumn conferences. One way you can join and reach us is if you are an EMWA member, you can join a closed LinkedIn group where we share news, activities, and interesting things for freelancers. I'm going to pop that in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. Another thing we do, EMWA organizes the Medical Writing Journal, which is a quarterly journal that's freely accessible. You don't need to be an EMWA member to read it. I'm the section editor for freelancing, and we usually try to have people writing articles that are relevant to freelancing. So if you're interested in pitching or if you're interested in reading, go there to the journal.emwa.org. I'll pop that too. And also you can get in touch with me if you want to pitch an article.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adriana. So, Eleanor, over to you. Tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll lead into your presentation, okay?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am Eleanor Steele, and I have been in MedComms for just over 20 years now. I started off working in agencies, working my way up the medical writing side, but I actually went freelance in 2018. And in 2020, I started working as the MedComms mentor, providing specialist training and mentoring for medical writers of all career stages. Then in 2024, I took over the MedComms Workbook, which Peter originally founded, and it is a specialist service for freelancers in MedComms, where we provide all kinds of support and resources, including work opportunities, regular meetings like this, and a really lovely community for freelancers in MedComms. But if you would like to find me on LinkedIn and everything that I do, that is where you can find me. And I will also be sharing some other links and things as we go through. But today we are obviously focusing on the results from the recent survey. So I am just going to get my screen up so we can actually share some data. So hopefully that is, yes, sharing the right screen, which is always a good start. Okay, so the MedComms Freelancing Barometer A quick introduction. This was a survey of freelancers working in and around MedComms, and participation was completely anonymous because we really wanted to make sure that everybody had the opportunity to be very honest and open. We ran the survey between the 1st and 31st of January, and this was actually done this year in 2025 and in 2024. That was something that Peter had run, and he handed it over to me very kindly for this year. So we were basically asking people to reflect on the previous year. So in 2024, we were looking back to 2023, and in this year's survey, we were looking back to 2024. And in the 2 years, we actually received different numbers of responses. So in 2024, we had 550 responses. And of those, around 73% were medical writers. So it was really predominantly medical writers, with other types of freelancer, including client services, editorial, strategy, design, and a few other types of specialisms, but at much smaller numbers than the medical writers. And then in this year's survey, we had 344 responses. And again, it was about 76% medical writers who were responding, and then the other types of MedComms freelancers in much smaller proportions. Now, it's important to note that this is not a longitudinal study, so we don't actually have any data on whether it was the same people responding from year to year or whether we had completely different groups. I'm sure there is some overlap, but we really don't know to what extent that overlap exists. So while it's interesting to compare the data from both years, we can't say for certain that there are particular trends. Okay, so what did we find? Let's start off by looking at the demographics. And the first question was looking at where people are based. Now, for both years, the biggest proportion of people who responded to the survey were based in the UK. That's not altogether surprising, considering the fact that Peter and I are both based in the UK as well. And so our personal networks and the people that we interact with are quite likely to be in the UK as well. But it's quite nice to see that we do have a significant proportion outside the UK in both years. Now, between the 2 years, we have a slightly bigger proportion of responses from Europe this year than last year, but it's smaller from the US and Canada and the rest of the world. I don't know entirely why that is, but it's only a small difference. So hopefully it hasn't affected the results too much. And obviously with Adriana and Lisa here, we're going to be talking about some of the differences and similarities between the responses that we're getting across those regions. Okay, so the next thing that I want to highlight is the level of experience and how long people have been working in MedComms. And we've got a bit of a spread, but in general, you can see that the two pie charts we have here are showing a relatively similar length of time worked in MedComms between the 2 years. So similar experience levels were reported in both years. And we've got quite a similar picture when we're looking at how many of those years people have actually spent freelancing in MedComms. So it's a similar length of time being reported in both years. And we also asked whether freelance work was the respondents' prime income, sole income, and for 87% in 2024, they said that freelancing was their sole income, whereas 93% this year responded that freelancing was their sole income. So does this mean that there are fewer people who freelance as a side gig this year, or potentially have some of that 13% who reported that freelancing was not their sole income last year actually dropped the freelancing that was a side gig or switched into their side gig? I don't know. But it's quite an interesting difference to consider. Now let us have a bit more of a look at that freelance income itself. So one of the questions we asked was whether people had worked as many hours as they had wanted in the previous year. Now, you can see that the proportion of people who said yes, they had, has really kind of shifted, not by a huge amount, but it looks like this year more people are reporting that they have worked as many hours as they wanted than in the previous survey. So looking at the free text comments that accompanied this question, we can see that it is still quite a mixed picture. These comments are really worth reading, particularly if you had a bit of a tough time last year, because there will almost certainly be people who have reported finding things tricky, and that might be actually really useful to read. So quite a few people highlighted that they had worked as much as they wanted, but to do that, they actually had to change the way that they were working or broaden the type of work that they took on, potentially diversifying their client base, maybe working weekends to fit in when work was available, or actually kind of capitalize on projects that were available during kind of peak times to make up for a trough that they experienced at other times of the year. So that was something that people were doing to make sure that they could work as much as they wanted. And people were also reporting that they were doing more small one-off projects rather than having long-term consistent work, which had been the norm previously for quite a lot of people. We also had quite a few comments about the fact that people experienced quite a slow start to 2024, and then work picked up towards the end of the year. So that, I would say, is quite a normal pattern in MedComms, as we often find that pharma clients working with agencies take a bit of time to commit to projects. So sometimes Q1 in particular is quite slow going, and then the work tends to ramp up. But I think this was exaggerated in 2024, and that was really reflected by some of the free text comments that we got. We also had some people saying that they had quite a slow summer, whereas the beginning and end of the year had more work available, and so they were working more. Okay. The next question that I want to highlight was whether people's income matched their expectations. So the pie charts you can see show that there is a bit of a shift, with more people reporting that they had earned what they were expecting to, or more than they had expected than in the previous year. Though, as one person commented, it was roughly what I expected to earn, but less than what I wanted. So is this really kind of not quite capturing the nuances of what people were expecting and why they were expecting a certain amount? So looking at the free text comments again, we had several people mentioning that they had actually adjusted their income expectations following their experiences in 2023. So it might be that they had earned what they expected, but that was not what they would have hoped for in previous years. It's not all bad news, though. There were a lot of positive comments, including people saying that they had earned less than they had expected, but had chosen to, and that was part of the reason why they were freelancing, because they wanted to have some flexibility. And other people were commenting on the fact that while it had been sort of feast and famine, they had earned their expected income overall because things balanced out over the whole year, even if there were slower times. So I think there's quite a lot going on. And the free text comments are really worth looking at for this question in particular. We then had a question about what happened to people's average rates. So this could be hourly rates or daily rates in the last year. And again, the responses were pretty similar between the 2 years. One thing I would like to highlight is that in 2025, we had fewer people reporting that they didn't know what had happened to their rates, which I think is a good thing. We need to understand what's happening to our rates to be able to have a sustainable freelance business. Now, there were some really interesting comments around this question, and this is actually quite similar to what I remember from last year's comments. Lots of people were saying that they didn't dare raise their rates because they knew that the market was unstable and they felt like it would price them out of the work that they were hoping to get. On the flip side, there were people who did increase their rates and reported that they were expecting pushback from clients, but that didn't materialize. So sometimes long-established clients that somebody had been working with for a long time didn't want to increase rates, but some of them did. It was not universally denied. But a lot of people were saying that they would increase their rate when they took on a new client, and that was a way to bring their rates up across the board gradually, and that they were having quite a lot of success with that. So I think it is a mixed picture, and not everybody managed to increase their rate, even if they wanted to, but it is a possibility. It's not being denied across the board. Other people reported that they were planning to increase their rates this year. So good luck to you if you're one of them. I will be very interested to hear what you say in next year's survey about this. And quite a few people commented that they didn't know whether their rate was good value or if they were actually trying to sort of price themselves out of the market by giving a price that was too high. Several people mentioned working with different rates with different clients, often when they were doing different types of work. So that could also be affecting the rates that people are receiving. Now let's look at the actual clients that people were working with. So one of the questions was around how many different clients each freelancer was working with. And we had quite a spread of different responses available, from I don't know and 0 individual numbers all the way up to 10, and then 11 to 20 or over 20. And we've got quite a spread of responses. So I've actually grouped the data into categories of 3 years. So 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and then 10 plus, and put these together in this little table. And so it's difficult to draw firm conclusions from these data, but I think we are potentially seeing a trend towards a more diverse client base, with more people actually working with more different clients during the year. And that does seem to reflect what we were hearing in some of the earlier questions about working with more clients, potentially doing smaller one-off projects with a variety of different clients, rather than having that long-term consistent work from 1 or 2 clients. But it is interesting to think about whether people's income streams are really diversifying, or whether this is not something that we're seeing. So one of the questions we had was, what percentage of your annual income was from your biggest client? And we can see that we've got roughly similar responses from both years, and nearly half of people responding to the survey say that over half of their annual income was from their biggest client. So it's 44% in both years had reported this. Now, on the previous slide, we had 11% of people saying that they only had one client in this year's survey. But the data seem to suggest that a bigger proportion of people had more clients, but were reliant, or strongly reliant, on the income received from that single biggest client. So again, the comments accompanying this question were very interesting, and a lot of people said that they were trying to diversify, but I think this was still a work in progress for quite a lot of people, following years where it was feasible to only have a couple of clients and get long-term income from them. There were lots of comments about trying to become less reliant on their biggest client, particularly among people who felt that their client was going through changes or the work seemed unstable. And lots of comments came from people who were saying that they were getting less work from their biggest clients. And so the proportion of income from that biggest client was decreasing naturally. And so it was being picked up by having a bigger, broader client base. We also had a question about whether people were getting work from recruiters. And it's quite interesting to see that in both years we got a fairly similar response, with the majority of people saying no. In the comments, we had quite a few people saying that recruiters offer lower rates than they would normally get, and that was a bit of a barrier. And some people said that they felt that the recruiters for freelance positions were actually trying to fill permanent roles via initial short-term contracts. Other comments were around concerns that the roles being offered by recruiters weren't actually a good fit. So I had quite a few people saying that they are medical writers being offered regulatory writing work and vice versa. And Other people saying that getting a freelance role through a recruiter often involves a lot of bureaucracy and takes a long time, but sometimes the work still doesn't materialize after all that effort has been put in. Let's now move on to job satisfaction. And in both years, it looks like people are generally pretty satisfied with freelancing. And the comments here were also very interesting. One person's comment on this question was just a long stream of scream emojis. So potentially they are not super satisfied, but I'm not sure we got the nuance there. But there were lots of comments around how you can balance the flexibility of freelancing with the stress of the uncertainty that comes with freelancing, and how sometimes that is tipping one way or the other, depending on how things are going. And some people are a little bit uncertain about kind of how satisfied they are with the current state of things. But generally, the feeling coming through from the comments was that freelancing is better than a proper job. We also asked people how likely it is that they would stop freelancing in the next year. Now, we had a slight text change between the 2 years. So in 2024, one of the answers was, yes, I definitely intend to stop. But we also had the answer, yes, I intend to stop and do something completely different. This year's text, we slightly tweaked the first answer. So it now reads, yes, I definitely intend to stop and go in-house, so that we can differentiate from people who want to do something totally different. Now, one person commented that unless freelancing improves, they might turn to pole dancing, which I would say is completely different from MedComms. And several people mentioned the fact that they are planning to retire in 2025 or over the next few years at some point. Others were talking about how they don't want to go into an in-house agency role, but are quite interested in moving into a farmer role from freelancing. But lots were saying that they will only stop freelancing if things get really dire financially. They really don't want to stop. They want to carry on freelancing, but they may be forced into it. And this is really something that they're considering, but hoping to avoid. Now, the final topic that I want to touch on is obviously AI. We can't avoid it. And I think the answers in the question about whether people are routinely using generative AI tools is really interesting to compare between this year and last year. So we can see there's been a big shift where we had about 60% of people saying, no, they didn't use it at all last year. And now we've got about 60% of people saying, yes, they do to some extent. And looking through the comments around AI, we get the feeling that people are curious about it and want to know more, but there is still quite a lot of caution. So this was a big topic at ISMAP EU in January 2025. Lots of discussion about the use of AI in the industry, but there was an emphasis on testing and pilots and potential tools, and not a huge amount of information about things that are already available and happening within medical writing. And I think that was also reflected by the comments that we received in the survey, where we have a lot of concern about data confidentiality and client prohibitions on the use of AI, but also people who are concerned about the environmental impact of AI and so are hesitant about using it because of that. Interestingly, there were only a couple of really, really negative comments about AI. And most of the people who were saying that they don't use it at the moment were coming more from the perspective that they don't know where to start or aren't sure how it could be useful to them in their roles yet, but are interested in learning more. The people who are using it talked about various tools for brainstorming and idea generation in particular, and others describe particular tools they use for research and polishing their writing. And you can check out the free text comments to look at the specific tools. There's sort of too many to list out here. But lots of people were also interested in training and learning more about AI and how it could be useful in different aspects of running a freelance business, including medical writing. And that's something that I am definitely going to be focusing on for the support that I do for the MedComms Workbook subscribers. So that's potentially something that you can sign up for if you're not already a part of, to really benefit from that training. There were also a lot of comments about the impact of AI on MedComms in the penultimate question of the survey, which focused on people's concerns about freelancing in and around MedComms. And there is that uncertainty about what's going to happen and how AI might affect our jobs and our careers and the ways that we work. But in conclusion, it's a mixed picture. But people do seem to be feeling like it is gradually improving. And you can access the full data set to really dig into those free text comments here. I've also created a summary article on LinkedIn, which goes through kind of the big topics, and you can find that here. And you can also find out more about the MedComms Workbook and how we are digging deeper into more of the topics that are coming through from the survey by following the MedComms Workbook on LinkedIn. But I think in general, freelancers are satisfied with their role and want to continue freelancing. They don't know how AI is going to affect that, but people are gradually beginning to use it more and more. And I think by this time next year, we're going to have some much more experience with what we can do and potentially more guidance from clients about that. But freelancers are generally optimistic despite the continued market fluctuations and evolution of the industry. But again, we will be running the barometer again next year. And so hopefully we will get even more information about how things are developing in the industry and for freelancers then. So join me in a year for that discussion. So I will just finish off by saying thank you very much, particularly to everybody who has responded to the survey and everyone who has helped promote it to other freelancers. And in particular, thank you to Peter, who originated the survey last year.
Okay, and thank you very much, Eleanor. That was great. I'm just going to say a couple of things very quickly, and then I'm very interested to hear what Lisa and Adriana have to comment on from their own communities. Just a couple of things that I think is important to stress. The reason, the way I set it up last year, and I'm very pleased Eleanor's done the same thing, we run it for the month and then we provide the full data set to everybody. So those of you who are watching a recording later on, it'll be in the blurb around the page. Those of you who are on today have seen the link. What I would do is encourage you all to go and look at that full data report, okay? Because there is masses of just interesting information in there, food for thought. Everyone's position is different. I mean, there's a problem with a survey like this because everyone's different, right? But nobody who is successfully freelancing is doing the wrong thing, but you may learn something from what other people are doing. That's what I want to happen. And I was very, very keen. I am very, very keen. I know Lisa, Adriana, Eleanor, you all run your groups. There are other people I can see in the audience who run their own groups, small groups, large groups, informal groups, whatever. And the idea was that you take the data we're providing freely and bring it into your own group discussion, okay? Or even if you just meet up with your mate over a drink tonight, okay? You can talk about your circumstances. There's so much food for thought in there. So please use that data in that sort of a way, okay? That was probably my main point. So my other points I'll worry about another time. Lisa, I'm going to bring you in first of all. Okay, so thank you very much for helping. You've obviously helped from a sort of US point of view, but also specifically from a pubs point of view, which is your speciality. So I know you've been looking at the data. Comment a little bit on what you've seen, what Eleanor said, and what you've seen from your data. Tell us what you're thinking. You need to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Unmute myself. I think, yeah, well, first of all, thanks again for having me here. And Eleanor, thanks for that really thoughtful conveying the results so thoughtfully, especially the way you really dug into all of the comments. As everyone keeps saying, the comments, like there's just so much gold in there to really understand what these numbers are saying. Yeah, I took a look. There were 64 respondents from the US and Canada, and they were a similar kind of level of experience in MedComms and similar level of experience in freelancing as the overall sample. And the thing that jumped out, and I don't know how easy it is to make sense of this, but what jumped out to me was that among the US Canada freelancers, there were a higher proportion who said that their hourly rate increased over the last year. So that was 47% in the North American sample compared to 35% in the overall sample who said that their hourly rate had increased. And when I'm looking at the comments, what I'm seeing is that a lot of freelancers, and I think I would say rightly so, have a practice of intending to increase their rates each year. Like, I think I would say that's, I would endorse that. I think that's a good practice with your existing clients, that each year you just say, well, my rate is increasing, some reasonable percentage each year that allows you to keep up with inflation and continue to, or freelancers who said that they would charge a higher rate when they brought in a newer client. So you only bring in a newer client if you can bring them in at least at the same or hopefully a higher rate than what you're being paid by your existing clients. But there were also freelancers who in the comments were saying that they didn't feel they had the latitude to increase their rates over this past year. They were afraid they'd lose their existing clients, or they were having trouble getting the clients they needed. So they didn't feel like they were in a position to increase their rates. Nonetheless, in North America, you have a lot of, about half of the freelancers who said their hourly rate increased last year. On the other side, there was a higher proportion in North America who said that their income was less than expected. That was 45% in North America compared to 35% in the overall sample. And I think similar to what Eleanor was saying is what I was seeing in those comments is we're still fighting back to trying to get to the income that we might have had in 21, in some of the really good boom years, so freelancers are still feeling like they'd like to be seeing healthier income, or they couldn't get as much work as they wanted. So it's it's still as Peter keeps saying, it's a mixed bag out there. It's and Eleanor, again, to your point, there were freelancers saying that they had to increase the range of the work that they were doing to bring in enough income last year. But nonetheless, freelancers in the US, 70% of them said they were very unlikely to stop freelancing. That was 66% in the overall sample. That's a healthy sign, right? It's a strong statement, to have a very high proportion saying they're very unlikely to stop freelancing. The last thing I'll say about this sample was that in the US Canada sample, 78% are members of AMWA, the American Medical Writers Association. And I was happy to see that. I feel like if you're a professional medical writer working in North America, you should belong to AMWA. And I was happy to see that. So
just if I can interject, and Lisa, that's interesting from a geographical point of view, but you also specialize on the pub side, and we had a question come in specifically. I just wonder, you have your regular meetings and you talk to the pubs people. Do you, just in a sentence or two, do you get the sense that pubs as a specialism is any different from the overall data that we've seen in MedComms? Is there anything that you've picked up or you could pick up that would highlight any differences, positive or negative, or would you say pubs is much the same as the rest of MedComms?
As far as I can tell, Peter, pubs is much the same as the rest of MedComms. Yeah, I can't really say that I see a difference. And in our calls in the last 6 months, it's been a similar picture. It's just a mixed bag. Some people are doing well, and some people are still trying to get the client base in place that they need. There was one comment that I thought was really interesting, that I find really intriguing. One comment, and I don't know if this is true or not, but saying that they think that more pharma companies are trying to find other models rather than using agencies. And the downstream effect of that, Eleanor's nodding, right? The downstream effect of that being, many of us were used to getting most of our work as freelancers from agencies. So if the agencies are not like running as much work, then they have less work. they're struggling probably to keep their own employees busy, so they may have less work to give to us as freelancers. So I'm interested in that angle. That was kind of an interesting one
And
for me.
and that's the sort of thing that I start to get a bit frustrated because we haven't got that long today, and there's so many different ways we could look at this data and talk about it. Again, I'd emphasize that the whole point of this is to try and give people the opportunity to chew over it themselves, think about it their own work, but through talk about it within their own groups and so on. I think that's really important. Um, I will say one thing, which I think is worth saying. I think we're probably. And I'm sorry, Eleanor, if I missed something you said to begin with, as it were. But I think we're all making an assumption that everybody knows that it's been pretty tough the last couple of years. The reason I started the barometer, I did this barometer a year ago, was because 23 had been a particularly troublesome year, and I was intrigued to see what was happening. And I think the enthusiasm with which people joined in last year was in part because there was a certain degree of concern about what the heck was going on. And I'm kicking myself, and I will always kick myself, that I didn't run this barometer the 2 or 3 years beforehand, because I think it would be really interesting to see the difference. If anyone's just coming into freelancing at the moment and wondering about that, that is the context. It was a hard year in 23, having been a boom time before that. And 24, the question was, how did it compare? And what we don't know, and Elliot, you're absolutely right to emphasize the fact this isn't a longitudinal study or something. So one of my theories is that a bunch of people who were freelancing at the beginning of last year and were struggling have dropped out of freelancing. So by definition, our population this year is going to be more positive because they've sort of survived and they decided to keep going. And I know certainly freelancers that retired or went back in-house, or because 23 was so difficult. Okay. So again, when you're looking at the data, think about it. Okay, guys, understand the context and look at those text comments and so on and so forth. Okay. Adriana, talk a bit about from a European point of view. So, I mean, EMWA, regulatory and MedComms, quite a variety of types of people that you deal with in the freelance group, but a European sort of focus to it. So, again, the same question to you. What have you seen? Any comments you've got that may be either different or not from that sort of overall data?
A very quick caveat before I dive into that, Peter, because in the chat, people were asking a bit about what the rates are and how difficult that is to set for freelancers. So
Okay.
EMWA has a freelance business survey. I posted a link in the chat. It's freely available for anyone to read. This data pertains to 2023, and EMWA is currently planning to launch a survey this year to be published next year. So again, some people were saying it doesn't distinguish between MedComms and regulatory, but again, it is so difficult, as we all know now from running the barometer, to have all the data, but there is some reference data that might be useful for freelancers.
But
Adriana,
we can stop you there.
if you don't mind my jumping in, the
Yeah,
AMWA survey, there is a pretty recent one. I think it was 23, and it is, as people are saying in the chat, it's behind a firewall. You have to be an AMWA member to access that survey data, but it's worth joining AMWA just to access that data. And it is broken down in a lot of different detailed ways, including by speciality, regulatory versus others, publications and other specialties. So it's really, really, really rich data. But again, you have to pay up to get to it.
And I'm just going to add in I'm going to add a
Yes,
very quick comment in because I get quite excited about this. But I also get a lot of hassle after discussions like this. People want to know what the rates are. Why didn't you ask what the rate was, Peter? I think there is limited data out there. You're both touching on the difficulties of getting it and how limited the data is and how, frankly, it can be very misleading because it's very difficult to ask the questions. And there's a whole discussion around how, as a new freelancer, you might want to investigate what reasonable rates are. My point, which I feel I need to say because someone will give me hassle about it directly, is when I set the barometer up a year ago, and the same we've carried through this year, I'm more interested in whether you're matching your expectations than whether you're charging X pounds or X plus £10 or whatever, okay? And I think there's a very sound, sensible logic behind that. If you're the freelancer who wants to work 3 days a week and you get 3 days a week work, you're doing fine. If you're a freelancer that wants to work 5 days a week and only gets 3 days a week, you're not fine. There's no judgment in there. It's just a question of what you're trying to do, matching your own expectations and so on. There's still nuances. Ellie's touched on it, but I want to explain that because I did not want to try and ask people what their rates were. A, I don't think they're particularly honest. B, it's very confusing. C, it's very difficult to pull the data out. And D, who cares? You know, what your rate is at the end of the day is something that you have to worry about. Having said that, there's a huge discussion and there's lots of benefit in talking together, meeting up with each other, all the little local groups, the little ways in which I've tried, other people have tried to encourage freelancers to talk to each other. It's very useful to have someone that you can sit and have a chat with over a gin and tonic or something. And that's the sort of conversation you can have. Right. Okay. So before
So
we turn this
jumping
into a
into
webinar just
the
about rates, Adriana, talk a bit about the European data,
Absolutely.
please.
So I'm going to jump into European data, and before that, there needs to be a lot of caution here. So not only, as Eleanor pointed out, there was around a huge difference between number of responses last year and this year. So from 550 to 344. From that, 21% were European responses. So there is an N of 70 around 12 countries. So anything I'm touching on today, I cannot tell you a trend. I'm just going to tell you that what the data is showing. It would be irresponsible to take any elations out of it. But I also would like to take the opportunity to also encourage European countries to participate more. But this is something where Eleanor and I and Lisa are going to be working for next year. So as I said, we have around 21% of respondents are from Europe. From that category, taking the lead from Lisa here, the majority belongs to the European Medical Writers Association, around 73%. In terms of experience in freelancing, the majority are within 1 to 10 years. So the vast majority are within 46% have been working as freelancers for 1 to 5 years. In terms of income and hourly rate, so this is interesting. So half of the respondents said that the rate stayed the same, while 40% said it increased. So again, you have a small number of responses. We don't know how different the 40% and 50% I'm saying here, but the vast responses were optimistic as well. People seem to be happy. They also said that their income was about what they expected, followed by it was less than expected and then more than expected. The overall satisfaction seems to be high. And yeah, overall, then the remaining data trends are in accordance with what Eleanor said previously in terms of there is a very mixed picture about AI. This is something we don't really know. And again, we can't have any data correlation here. But from the European data, there is an interesting sense that people who are more skeptical of AI have more years of experience. Many of them in the comments said they're reaching retirement. It seems people who started freelancing are more open to the idea of AI. Again, it does seem like a cliche. Younger people are more open to new technologies, but this is something that would be very interesting to see in future barometers. As Eleanor already said, she's going to refine a little bit to get a bit of idea. Also, some people in the chat were saying they would be interested in knowing what AI people are using. Again, there is only so much we can include in a barometer. But yeah, that might be something that would be interesting to know later on. So yeah,
Again,
in terms of European data, I will wrap up for here because everything else is a bit difficult to touch on due to the smaller number of responses.
Exactly, and this will be the answer to quite a few questions. Is there's not enough data for that particular group and so on. But Adriana, same question to you as I put to Lisa. You're talking to through the group business group and so on, freelancers. Whatever. I just wonder whether there's anything that's either is it anything jarring? Is anything you're talking about within the EMWA business group which is conflicting with what we're talking about today? What the results have been? Is there any useful extra bits that you could throw in from what you've talked about with your group?
It really aligns with the overall results. It is a mixed picture. So while last year, and especially with the people I had the opportunity to speak in person at the conferences, 2023 was not a good year. I'm really looking forward to talking to people now. So far, we're seeing people saying, yes, it's better. Another doesn't know, because a big reminder also to anybody, especially people new to freelancing, this is the first quarter of the year. You can't evaluate how your year is going to be based on this. It's usually a slow year. March is coming, financial analysis and accounting departments are going to kick in later on. So we really don't know what's going to happen. So fortunately, maybe down the line, we'll have a clear idea of how people are coping with this year, if they're changing strategies. This was something that Eleanor lightly touched upon, that people are changing a little bit in terms of their approach and the work and then deliver. So I think we have to wait and see what people are going to say.
Of course, of course. But that, again, that's part of the point of a survey like this. We're looking back at last year, we're raising lots of issues. If you're sitting there thinking about this year ahead, however positive or negatively, I'm hoping you're getting lots of ideas and thinking about your business. And then, of course, it's down to you and how you make the year work for you. And then in 26, Eleanor will run another one, and maybe we can start to see a pattern over time. As I say, I will forever apologize for not having run this for the last 10 years, because it would have been lovely to see the tracking. Eleanor, bring you in, and I know we're running out of time a little bit, but has anything been said that you want to comment on? Or in particular, I thought perhaps, Eleanor, you might just say a few words about the AI training specifically. So there's two parts to that question, but on the AI side, a lot of people wanting training. As a general point, I think one of the problems a lot of people have is figuring out, as freelancers, how they're going to get training and what they should be training in, because there's so
Yes.
much noise around it and so many people. But just to start with some basic ideas, and you've got your own MedComms Workbook group. You've had your
Yep.
meetings talking to people. Is there anything coming out of the group that's different from the data that we're looking at?
Okay, so one thing that is more about the kind of broader responses that we saw, I think part of the difference between the response numbers from last year to this year is because things are looking up. And so there are fewer people footling around on LinkedIn going, oh, yeah, I've got time to fill in a survey. And that, I think, is a positive sign. So we have more people who are too busy to join in with a survey like this than we did last year. I think it's also possible that some of the people who were struggling last year and reporting that they had not had enough work the year before have gone in-house or started to do something completely different. Maybe there are more
Oh,
ex-MedComms pole
dancers.
dancers out
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
I don't know. But I think that has probably had an impact on the numbers as well. In terms of any differences between the survey data and things that I have been hearing from individuals within the workbook and things like that, no, it's really very similar, that some people have had a great time, some people haven't, some people have had a very mixed time, some people are trying new things, others are trying to figure out why things have changed. I think a lot of people have said things like, I've had a good year, but I've turned down less work than I had in previous years. A lot of people have said, I've never had to do any business development before. I've never had to go after clients before. I do now. But when I do that work and reach out to people, do the marketing, use my network, the work comes in, which I think makes sense. And in some ways, it's really a reflection that the industry is maturing and the work is not just falling from the sky because it's a new thing and there aren't enough people who are experienced enough to do the work. We've got a good workforce now. And so you do actually have to market your business and find new clients and talk to people and network. And that is perfectly normal. Industries that have been around for longer than MedComms, that's how it works. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It just means that people have to put their business mindset in place and treat their freelance business as a business rather than just doing the work that they used to do in an agency on their own terms, basically. On the AI point, I am talking to several people who provide training around AI in particular, but also around AI specifically in MedComms. And we will hopefully be running some training within the MedComms workbook as part of the subscription, but also having offers for people to do AI specific training at different levels with a reduced price from the kind of normal price within the workbook as well. We've also got some sessions that will be coming up around collaboratively sharing what we each do. because I think lots of people are trying different things, and just having a conversation about what you've tried and how you found it will be useful. And one of the things that I do is try different tools and then use what I have done as part of my training. So I did an update for the MedComms Workbook at the end of December, and I used Gamma.ai, which generates slides for you. And so I used my prompt, I generated the slides, and then I used those slides pretty much as they came to give my update, pointing out what worked and where it really did not work. So I think doing that kind of thing helps give people a picture of what is possible and what you need to look out for, because there are a lot of pitfalls with these tools if you're not using them in a really conscious way and just expecting them to produce the same kind of work that you as a professional would do. So yes, do sign up for the MedComms Workbook, or follow us on LinkedIn to hear about the different things that are happening, because there's lots planned.
Okay, thanks. And there was a whole discussion, I think, generally about AI training. I mean, within your individual groups, great, but I there's a gulf between, which I got quite excited about last year. It's like last year, particularly, bigger companies started sort of smugly sitting there telling us that they were sorting it out behind closed doors, and everyone's doing different things. And I think the further you are away from that environment, the more you just wonder what the heck's going on and how many different things are going on behind those closed doors. If you're sitting there as a freelancer, there are loads of tools and there's loads of all sorts of things. I suppose I would just say that please, don't ignore it anymore. Conversations a year ago along the lines of, well, it'll never affect my job. I think we all know it's going to affect all of us, and you have to play a little bit. So there's lots more we could talk about in there. There's some questions coming in. I just thought I would cover off, because I'm saying this to the public, and we've already said the 2026 survey will be done in January. Someone's come in from client services side saying it'd be nice to see differences between client services and writers, for instance. Well, as Eleanor started by saying, and I'll say again, in all my time of trying to survey freelancers in MedComms about anything, it's the writers who join in, the client services folk who sit back and don't. So anything we can do to encourage more different sorts of freelancers to join in with this sort of exercise, I think that would benefit all of us. Okay. I'm going to draw the line there. I'm going to say a huge thank you to you guys, because I think it's fascinating. I have to emphasize that I think the whole point of this is simply to give people food for thought. Go and look at the report, go and look at the article, and share the information, your ideas, and sit in your own little groups, however you do it, informally, online, offline, and talk to each other and share this information. Use this as a way of catalyzing discussion, and watch out in the course of the year for more discussion. I'm going to say follow hashtag MedComms, although that's not my responsibility anymore, but I think more people can talk to each other through that hashtag, the better. And in 2026, there'll be a follow-up to this barometer. So those of you online, don't rush away. Those of you, and we'll carry on talking, but for now, I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody. Come and look at NetworkPharma TV. That's my little plug, and you'll find loads of videos about all sorts of things, and I'm hoping we'll build that from here. So thank you very much. Take care, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now. Let's have a little wave. Bye.